Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special condensed edition of everything that happened in Uptime 2026, which was one day of follow the sun presentations, all the way beginning from sunrise in Tokyo, all the way to sunset in San Diego in the afternoon at the end of a long day of 10 hours of presentations, discussions, and content. We're distilling it all down into this 1 hour summary for you. It's your espresso shot before MWC of all the key things and issues you should be looking out for. And if you're not attending MWC here, then here is your setup and agenda for the year in terms of what's happening in private 5G and what's important in 2026. So one of the special things about Uptime this year is that it's our 5th anniversary. We started in 2021, just after COVID, in Villa Grifoni, which is the birthplace of both Guglielmo Marconi. He carried out his first wireless building, and it's really great to see how the community has grown over the years and what we've been able to achieve. So thank you all for your support over these years, and thank you for attending this year's conference, which is hosted in Oxford, where we have cable-free, and we have Stephen Patrick. So a big shout out and thank you to him for giving us the control room, a central place where speakers could drop in, chat, meet, connect, and we could watch all the proceedings. Thank you once again to Stephen Patrick for hosting that, and hope that next year many more of you will be able to join us in the central control room, where you can watch, talk, and discuss everything that's important in private 5G. One of the key themes for this year was how can we grow from 5,000 networks, private 5G networks, which according to analysts have been deployed in 2025, beginning from 2020 when spectrum first became available. We had lots of bottlenecks in terms of access to spectrum, access to radios, access to devices which supported private 5G communications. We've now burst through all of those bottlenecks, and hopefully over the next decade, we can grow this to 500,000 networks. It's a tall order, but I think that's what we're all up for the challenge for, and that's one of the themes that we had in today's discussion. So we began in Tokyo. We had Miyata-san joining us from Sumitomo Electric, alongside also Sandrine Legrand from Microamp, and they shared with us what they've been doing with millimeter wave on DAS. So this was really interesting because millimeter wave, as you recall, was one of the spectrums and technologies which launched private 5G in the late teens when everyone got excited. It was in NSA to begin with, which had its own challenges, which meant that because you needed the carrier frequencies in the NSA band for the control part of the network, it was actually quite difficult to deploy for private networks. And there was also issues in terms of devices, etc. So it's really fantastic to see how millimeter wave in 5G SA has made a comeback, and Microamp and Sumitomo have been at the forefront of this. They showed us here a DAS system running 5G in N258, getting up to 1 megabit of transmission capability, and how it was able to sustain it at pretty high rates, even as they moved all across this basketball. And Sandrine Legrand also helped us out in showing to Dublin. So really encouraging to see the growth of interest in millimeter wave in 5G SA, and the fact that it can be deployed and practically used as well. And another great use case in terms of ports, which we know is one of the big applications for private 5G in terms of verticals. We then had Hari Kumar joining us from Excel Smart. They have been at the forefront of deploying private 5G in the Asia Pacific region, particularly in ASEAN, deployed the first private jet in Indonesia for mining, for a coal mine, when they were merger with Excel. And we went on from smart mining to what they're doing in terms of smart ports and smart factories as well. And Indonesia, Hari reminded us, is potentially a very large market for private 5G, and we hope to see it grow. He also gave us a detailed case study in terms of what was happening inside the port and the benefits in terms of throughput and productivity, somewhere between a 10 to 40% increase in productivity, and a turnaround time and logistics velocity went up anywhere from 25 to 75% in terms of improvement. I mean, those are massive numbers for any OT network and any large operation like a port. And the amazing thing was the reduction in the number of access points and the complexity of the network dropping from 370 APs to about 9, which is a phenomenal number. Reduction in the number of APs, almost 40 times by my calculation. Just looking down here in my book where I made these comments. Yeah, it's a 40 times reduction, or a 40-fold reduction. Huge benefit in cost, complexity, ease of being able to move, mobility, etc. We then had our first APAC panel where Hari was also joined by Kunal Patil, my ex-colleague from Athernet and HPE, now leading business development for Apirun in Asia Pac, and also Jayan Moge from Pegatron and Gopalakrishnan from BI in India. And we had quite an interesting discussion. I think one of the things that came out of it, Jayant was telling us about how Pegatron has deployed the world's largest 5G smart factory and some of the advantages that they get from it. The really interesting point, something that was really new to me that he mentioned, was that many factories, for example, they've been looking at putting it into factories in India, for example, in other parts of the Asia Pacific, how many of them do not even have Ethernet today. So going from on 5G, from straight onto Ethernet PDUs is the first step of digitalization, because they're actually leapfrogging the whole deployment of Ethernet over wires. So in the same way that in the consumer world, Asia and many developing economies leapfrogged from without the intermediate step of fiber or fixed line. Jayan was telling us that something like this is happening in factories in Asia. This was new information for me, and certainly something that's really, really interesting and something we want to track going forward. From Gopal, we also heard about why end customers and system integrators are working with operators, and the flexibility that operators bring in terms of being able to manage upfront capex versus annual fees, being able to create the financial profile that works for the customer, playing with the ecosystem, because the ecosystem is still evolving, and being able to work with devices, radio vendors, etc., to be able to deliver value to the customer. And also that VI is looking at this as a holistic IoT opportunity rather than just private 5G. The attractions that he saw was, besides mines and ports and heavy industry, etc., was also hospitals. And this is something we have back region, how the opportunity to work in hospitals is a huge benefit as well, especially with advantages, the advances in digital imaging, the need to be able to communicate amongst staff, patients, doctors, when you're doing scans and MRIs, etc., being able to move that data very rapidly towards the consultant who's able to then give almost real-time feedback to the customer, because the world is moving digital, and this is what customers and patients expect from their daily life. They want to see that in the hospital as well. But one of the challenges is availability of spectrum, which was all about what they can do from Nitin Tivatia, about what L&T can do, how they can bring domain expertise to work together with operators and customers to be able to design and deploy networks that are targeted towards the enterprise, bringing in the knowledge of the specific domain that the enterprise works in, the networking characteristics and know-how that's needed in that particular domain, to augment the skills of the mobile operators. And one of the issues, in fact, that Patel brought up was the spectrum for private families, and to brought this also experience with that, because consumers of traffic is so high that in urban areas you really can't release spectrum for private 5G. So most of the deployments are taking place in areas that are either rural, semi-rural, or isolated from urban areas like ports, etc., where they can use spectrum without affecting the consumer network. But if you want to do deployments in places like hospitals, schools, educational institutions, etc., then you really need to have access to private spectrum to be able to do that. And that's in particular in APAC that we hope to evolve later on. And there's a talk from Global Star, which talks about new spectrum being made that can be used for private 5G. So hang on and listen to that part if this is an issue for you in deployments and you want to discover new spectrum as well. We had Mansoor, who gave an insight, of course, in what's happening, insight into the challenge in terms of spectrum, how this means that private 5G is an opportunity for operators, but they are held back by spectrum. So hopefully we'll be seeing the spectrum challenge unbottlenecked in Asia Pac. We had Louis Tan from ASCII joining us as well to give the perspective of an end-to-end vendor from Asia Pac. They do radios and devices. And particularly commenting on the widespread availability now of this and the chat of deploying 5G identifies the spans, devices with different manufacturers such as Apple. Louis joining on that panel as well. With that, it was time to move on to Asia, from Asia to Europe. And our first speaker in Europe was Massimiliano Messinasco, who is the global portfolio lead for mobile private networks at Vodafone. And Vodafone has 173 commercial, these are slices, but about 60% of them are classic MPNs, as we would think about it, a dedicated network with its own core and using the radio with sovereignty over the data and isolation over the data, etc. A huge range of customers that he took us through, and also commented that when it came to demand in terms of can we grow this to 500,000 networks across the next decade, Massimiliano was very anxious to point out that it's not really a demand issue because they are seeing a lot of demand for mobile private networks. The issue really is in terms of cost and complexity, operational efficiencies, to be able to deliver the service to the customer in not just a way that technically meets the needs of the customer, but also meets their cost parameters so that it's affordable and much more widely adopted. So this is the challenge to the vendor and SI domain as well, in terms of making the networks more consumable and affordable by the end customer. We were then glad to have Stephen Patrick of Cable Free share with us what's been his experience. Cable Free has been around for nearly 30 years and entered the private network space probably about a decade ago. I remember working with them quite early in 2020, 2021, when they were one of the most agile and innovative players in terms of bringing radios to market. Some of the earliest deployments, for example, that we had in the UK, 4.8 to 4 radios. They've got a very agile architecture where the radio can support both 4G and 5G, and they can tune it to whatever band you want because of the modular way that it is built. So they provide a full range of devices, outdoor and indoor, and affordable from my experience as well. Stephen believes that this is the breakout year for private 5G for much of the reasons that we talked about: spectrums available, devices available, radios, etc. And a lot of the demand that they are seeing is from the usual corporate private networks, but the horizontal demand for it is from security requirements, push-to-talk, public safety, robotics, another horizontal application, wireless CCTV, broadcast. We have a special panel later where we talk more about that, but broadcast HDTV is clearly a use case being used for event, being able to use a news gathering, and being able to do pop-up networks to meet the demands of the broadcast world. So disaster recovery that we've been talking about. And of course, Stephen was telling us about how they're beginning to do work in stratospheric deployments where you deployed on large balloons and then you get coverage down, and also fixed wireless, which has been a big driver of private 5G network adoption as well. So Stephen, thank you for your optimism. Unfold in 2026, and we are going to see this huge sort of expansion in network growth and lead us to 500,000 networks by the end of the next decade. We then had a Europe-wide panel, and joining us, Justin Eichenlaub from M3 Connect in Germany. They target hotels, retailers, so not your traditional factory floor, although they have a few deployments on the factory floor as well. But he was keen to point out that this is that demand for private 5G networks is well beyond just the headline use cases in factories for Ethernet Industry 2.0, but quite wide deployments in holiday parks and bungalows, hotels, retail facilities. And quite interestingly, Justin said that he got involved in private networks because he was using a private cellular network to control a whole range of telephones or mobile phones that he was using to sample Wi-Fi signals and testing Wi-Fi coverage. So quite interesting. And M3 Connect operates across 23 countries with 17,000 locations and partner sites that they actually cover. And what he would really like to see for us to debottleneck private 5G and take us towards 500,000 networks is greater simplicity in ability to deploy networks. He gave the example of how in Wi-Fi, which is where M3 Connect originally came from, literally with 3 clicks, you can order, deliver, and deploy a network at a customer site. And that's really where we've got to get to. And later on in the afternoon, I think we've got some new vendors who talk about being able to deploy it in this way. Somreen then gave us more examples in terms of the work that's gone on to make 5G millimeter wave in SA come back into demand, and a whole range of deployments that they've got. There's 15 or 20 deployments that they've got, and how they've really worked a lot on their own IP, including one, so that it's not just, but it's actually optimized for the frequency band and the capability that and Mikko Uusitalo, who many of you will know as one of the pioneers of private 5G in Europe, beginning with Edgecom in Finland. Mikko has been behind the growth of something like 130 networks across Europe, and he shared with us his experience. And he thought that 2026 is going to be a year of consolidation. And soon after, of course, we heard the news about the merger between Firecell and Acceleran to create a integrated player. And so this was something you heard here first, the whole idea that it's going to consolidate. Mikko also pointed out that if you want to deploy these networks at scale, companies operate across Europe, so you need to have enterprises or system integrators also who have the scale to deploy across Europe. We heard the same requirement from Justin, operating 23 countries across Europe. You need to have people on the ground for L1, L2 for care. So you need local reps and who understand the local language and culture and local regulations, etc. So having the scale and the footprint becomes really important for success. With that, we move back across the channel into the UK. Bolden acquired Edgecom and is now the largest operator of large-scale private and 30-odd mission-critical or business-critical private networks in production that they operate across Europe. And I'm pleased that in our last life as Athernet, we've been partner to a significant number of those deployments. And he felt that there are 5 ways that private 5G is driving the change within organizations and allowing them to be more connected and digital and more effective. The first is clearly, the whole sort of support for digital transformation. Leaving aside all the fancy use cases in terms of low latency, Ethernet PDUs, and all the esoteric things that you can do with private 5G, the simple fact is, lots of people just simply want to be able to make a Teams call or a WhatsApp connection from anywhere in the field. We've been so used in carpeted environments of having access to Wi-Fi and being able to communicate or digitalize on demand that we don't realize that there's a revolution of the same type that's now happening in the field, in the non-carpeted areas. And so the 5G network, especially when you move into networks that are easy to measure in square miles or square kilometers rather than square feet, there really is no practical or affordable alternative to 5G, and that's really where 5G comes into the fore, private 5G network. He took us through all the key ways in which operational efficiency can be improved, safety and security, being able to push to talk, putting wireless cameras on perimeters, being able to monitor body-worn cameras, for example. I remember when the fines were adopted, they were really driven by push-to-talk and safety to their employees, connected worker, man down, all of these use cases that have been driving it. Sustainable access points, and even if you were to move towards something that's a neutral host, where you just have one set of radios instead of radios from 4 to 5 different operators. So if you have a neutral host combined with a private 5G network, how that drives sustainability as well. And then, of course, ensuring business continuity. So you may have Wi-Fi, you may have wireline, but making sure, especially as your businesses and your critical operations move more and more onto wireless. We lived in an era that was wireless first. We're now moving into an era that's wireless only. You need to have that resiliency and redundancy, and having both networks, Wi-Fi and 5G, supports you in that. They both have their strengths, but they can also complement each other from a business continuity viewpoint as well. So our thanks to Andrew Conway for that discussion. I'm sure there'll be many of you catching up with him at MWC, as with all the presenters and participants at Uptime 2026. We then had the privilege of Dean Bubley hosting the UK panel, and the privilege of Mansoor joining us again a second time. Mansoor, as many of you know, was the former CTO of Ofcom and also head of RAN at BTEE. Mansoor was one of the people, together, of course, with Phil Marnick, who was responsible for Spectrum at Ofcom, who were behind the development of 3.8 to 4.2 as a spectrum that was released for private networks in 2022. Work, of course, happened from 2018, 2019, and maybe even earlier to do that. And I think just before the conference started, in the few months before that, France has officially released that spectrum for private 5G as well in production. So this 4.2 is expanding across Europe, and hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll have ably handled by Dean Bubley, who we also had Alex Smith from Antivia Networks, who told us about the deployment that they had done at Bath Rugby Football Club. So not a big Premier League stadium, but a smaller, more intimate facility. But even there, private 5G is affordable. It's meeting use cases in terms of providing operational communications, being able to deal with sales of food, snacks, items, deal with electronic point of sale transactions, signage, communications between to special content from the club to VIPs or subscribing fans. So completely changing the fan experience, improving it for players, operational staff, and fans and viewers who are visiting. And Matt Stagg shared with us. Matt was originally in BT Sport, and then has been working with Neutral Wireless in terms of doing some of the first live broadcasts. For example, for the King's Coronation in the UK, they used a private 5G spectrum and network for broadcast video, from which video was sent out to, I think, the 3 or 4 major networks. And that was an innovative use of private 5G. And this is something that is increasingly going to be seen more of. And Ofcom in the UK has just made spectrum available for temporary events, just to encourage use cases like this. And Patrick clearly also shared with us his, and Stephen Patrick from Cable Free shared with us his experience of deployments in the UK. Milton Keynes, for example, across the city, where Cable Free equipment is supporting citywide network of autonomous vehicles and little delivery robots to bring a more efficient use of autonomous vehicles and citizen transport and logistics to life. So do go and visit Milton Keynes if you can. Besides the famous concrete cows, you've now got autonomous robots, delivery vehicles, and buses that you can enjoy, courtesy of private 5G on the city's network. We were then entertained by Gianluca Vereen with his private 5G networks that you can take with you, because physical AI happens at the end. You've got drones, robots, and all kinds of things happening in remote locations, whether you're in a battlefield or you're in the Cortina Olympics, where very near where, in fact, Gianluca was from the very area, sitting between Cortina and Milan. Correctly, there is actually, from my former Athernet days, an Athernet network, private network supporting emergency response and public safety up in the hills in Cortina. So thank you, Gianluca. And Gianluca was also telling us why, after having founded Athernet and exited to HPE, what was it that was so exciting about private 5G that drew him back into the game? So, and he validated the story that we have. There's we're just at the right stage of growth now, and the best times for private 5G still yet to come. And Gianluca is focusing on networks that you can take with you, portable networks, tactical networks that are transportable in backpacks and vehicles, etc., designed for bringing the sovereignty to the radio core and mission critical voice and push to talk, and how they're focusing on seamless connectivity between national networks and tactical networks. And what happens when you've got fire, police, SWAT teams, everybody coming into the same region with their own private networks, and you've got national scale networks for nationwide connectivity as well. How do you make these work together? How do you allow IMS users to move from one network to the other? How do you segregate when segregation is needed and allow people to use it when they are able to use it as well? And the normal roaming techniques, etc., are not as useful in these cases, and you need to have some special ways of federating and allowing this to happen. So if you've got more interest in that, please do talk to him at MWC. We then also heard from one of the other stalwarts of the private 5G world, Druid, been around for 25 years now with their platform, which is really designed for ease of use by the enterprise and system integrators, but it's really focused on high availability configurations with 5 nines of availability, with the independent core, the support 4G and 5G on the same network. And interestingly, Mike was presenting to us all the way from Cape Town, where he was attending probably the MWC of mining, if we were to describe it that way. Mining is one of the biggest consumers of private 5G networks, and Mike took us through what the experience is, how Wi-Fi is really not addressing a lot of the emerging applications, particularly push-to-talk, broadband, control of autonomous vehicles, etc. So we're seeing a lot of switching from Wi-Fi to private 4G and 5G, reliability, coverage, range, mobility, and security. But one of the things that one shouldn't forget is, of course, that deploying a private 5G network does not make Wi-Fi, doesn't block you from deploying Wi-Fi, because you've got hotspots that you can use to power devices which don't have 5G in it. So if you've got a tablet or some kind of device which is Wi-Fi only or Bluetooth, you can your phone or a rugged phone or a little Pebble with 5G connectivity and also Bluetooth and Wi-Fi hotspots can enable those devices. And so we call that Wi-Fi over 5G. So if you think of Wi-Fi as a way of actually as the last meter of connectivity, then instead of having to lay down fiber and put in all of those sort of connections that you need, you replace all of that fiber and long-range connectivity with a 5G network. So this is Wi-Fi over 5G, and the two are actually complementary to each other. And we think that private 5G probably drives greater take-up of Wi-Fi in terms of many end devices as well. We then heard from Tamer Kadus, who's General Manager for Terrestrial Networks at XCon RAN, which is part of Globalstar. And this is a particularly interesting presentation for me, because Globalstar addresses two particular constraints in private networks, the way I see it. So firstly, they will allow, if you're looking at larger deployments, 4 times more capacity than you would from a traditional macro RAN. So if you were to cover a stadium or a high density area requiring lots of throughput, they have a very unique way of deploying the RAN, and this is 3GPP standard, so no changes required on the device end. So this is more on the infrastructure side, where you're getting more capacity. And the second thing is that they have this unique access to band 53 spectrum, which is just under 2.4 gigahertz, close to band 40 that we are familiar with. So very good characteristics in terms of coverage and penetration. Band 53 was originally a satellite band, but what Globalstar have successfully done is to have it permitted by regulators for terrestrial use. So terrestrial to terrestrial, not like Starlink, which is from satellite to ground, but ground to ground. So just deploying a conventional private 5G network in band 53, using radios that you place on the ground and using standard devices. So I didn't know this, but all your Apple phones from iPhone 14 onwards have the band 53 in it, because it's the band that Apple actually uses for its satellite communication. So that band is enabled, but you can also use it for terrestrial connectivity on private 5G and band 53. It has been authorized for local terrestrial use across 13 countries, Canada, USA, Mexico, Brazil, so big chunk of North America, and coming down into major countries in Latin America as well. Deployed. It also includes some of the major countries in Africa, so for example, South Africa, where there's mining. And in Europe, the first country that's been authorized for deploying networks locally on band 53 is Spain. So if you're in any of those countries and you're looking to deploy a private 5G network, then do get in touch with Globalstar, because they have spectrum and RAN to allow you to deploy it. The RAN is also available from a number of other vendors. I think Nokia produce it, and also cable-free to my devices are also becoming more and more available. Zebra, for example, now have handheld scanners or tablets that are on band 53, so the band is being increasingly adopted. And maybe over time we'll begin to see this, and this may be a solution for countries like India and APAC, etc., where this band can be used locally as well. Countries where there isn't easy access to private 5G spectrum at the moment. So this is one of the more interesting stories in private 5G today. So if you want to catch up with Tamer and his team, please look him up at MWC. And here we have a bit more detail in terms of what is behind XCOM RAN and band N53 as well. He also shared with us, using this XCOM RAM with the capacity that they have, some of the benefits that you get, and the productivity and the payback was very, very attractive. And these are numbers from ABI Research, and Globalstar can provide it as well in terms of the details behind the economics and the assumptions that were used in that. One interesting thing, as far as the US market is concerned, CBRS, of course, is dependent on the SAS. So the SAS dictates when you have access, what power you can transmit at. And which is great for many applications, particularly those which are not near Navy bases, etc., and where the risk of unexpected changes in SAS. But if you are deploying something that's mission critical and you want to know you have guaranteed access to spectrum, then N53, which is already enabled for use in the USA, is an interesting option. And there are radios available from XCOM RAN, and also, I believe, from cable free, that work in both CBRS and N53. So from the same radio, you can have N53 for your mission critical or business critical applications, and you can have CBRS for capacity and less critical applications. So quite an interesting concept, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that. We then moved into the full US morning, and we had Peter Capiello from Future Technologies presenting. This was really interesting. I've worked with Peter, from the late teens, USA under CBRS, and I think we put up a network together with AWS as well during the COVID times in Northern California, I think somewhere near Sacramento, probably. And Future's been around for 25 years, but the last 15 years, they've been very active in private cellular networks, looking at both public with government and Department of Defense, and of course also with a large number of private players. Future Technologies, it's a system integrator. They use radios and cores and accessories from a wide range of vendors. So if you're interested in someone who can design and put together a network with best of breed solutions, or even end-to-end, then please do talk to them, because they really have a lot of experience in deploying these networks in the US for very demanding customers. And if you want to see private 4G or 5G in action and look at the ecosystem of what's available, I was really impressed and amazed by the warehouse facility or demo facility that Peter and his team, that Future Technologies, have in Atlanta. And we had some demos of these CBRS or private 5G, 4G enabled forklifts that were running around and doing tasks, and lots of case studies, some of them which feed into, for example, the robotics session that we were having later. And we're deploying thousands of AGVs, autonomous mobile robots, AMRs, at Fortune 100 company. Lots of interesting case studies that you can see there. So please hook up with Peter To find out more, we were then joined by another stalwart of the private 5G world, Boingo, known for their wireless networks. I think if you travel, it's impossible to travel in and out of an airport in the USA and many other parts of the world without connecting to a Boingo Wi-Fi network. And they brought that knowledge of airports into private 5G as well, deploying some of their first private 5G or 4G networks into airports in the US. Newark Airport's Terminal A, for example, where Derek Peterson, who's CTO, took us through the deployment and some of the outcomes, making it a seamless digital journey, both for the passengers and the cybersecurity platform. Really interesting in the way that they've converged DAS, Wi-Fi, and private LTE, because Boingo is a big player, of course, not just in Wi-Fi, but also in building cellular coverage. So really good use of integrated use cases, and please do contact Peter for more. San Diego Padres, in terms of Petco Park stadiums, another big emerging use case. We heard earlier from Antivia, who put it into a small stadium. This is the other scale. The San Diego Padres is one of the large major league stadiums in the US, and you can see one of the biggest use cases there has been for these payment terminals, and it reduces wait time by 30%, which means probably sell 30% more hot dogs and more concessions, and 50% less line abandonment. And you can see ultimately it all goes through into the bottom line. So this is why more and more stadiums are looking at deploying private 5G networks. And also the convention center is another area. Many of you have gone into a convention center. I've seen this even at places like MWC. Do a demo that on the evening before the convention works absolutely brilliantly, and very often you're using, if there's no spectrum available, you're using Wi-Fi. And on showtime, you move out into the show floor, tens of thousands of people move into the convention center, Wi-Fi gets overloaded, and all of a sudden that careful robotics demo or AMR demo that you had prepped for suddenly doesn't work because they can't get connectivity, or the connectivity is degraded to such an extent. So having private 5G for operational use is a huge benefit in convention centers. And also, I used to find going to conventions that we used to pay anywhere up to $1,000 a day or $1,000 for a dedicated fixed line connection, where they'd actually wire a cable to your stand and you could connect into, so that your demos and stuff could work. And of course, one of the reasons for the cost is that if you see them, they've got to lay the wire down all the way to your booth, put it under the carpets, rip it up. Someone's got to come and check it's all working. Imagine if you just gave someone a private 5G CPE and they were able to use it on their stand. So they have dedicated bandwidth with quality of service, and it becomes so easy for the convention center. A lot of cost removed, so margin goes up, ease of deployment, and also hopefully lower cost for the customer as well, and it's a win-win for everyone. So I certainly hope to see more and more deployments in convention centers. We then move to two really important customers. I've been looking forward to this for some time, to have Rob Greiner from Cargill, a big food processor manufacturer. Rob was saying on one of the talks that I attended, that if you went into a supermarket, probably 50%, more than 50% of the items there had been touched by Cargill in some way or the other. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. So they have about 1,000 sites across the world, and working together with Celona and NTT Data, who are NTT system provider, Celona the network provider, 150 networks a year. across their footprint. So private 5G is not going to go into all of the 1,000 because some of them it's not appropriate, but a big number of them are going to get a private 5G network. And Rob talked about what makes private 5G so compelling. We know a lot of the reasons, the coverage and reliability, etc. But one of the things that he talked about is how cost-effective private 5G actually is. And when you think of it, you're covering these large yards and grain silos and big manufacturing sites. You begin to see. I mean, we saw earlier how XL Smart talked about how they reduced it from 395 APs down to something like nine APs, a 40-fold reduction in APs. You can begin to see, how that begins to drive cost reductions in terms of wiring complexity support. The other point that Rob brought out is that although Wi-Fi is improving, every time you do a Wi-Fi refresh, the number of APs just keeps going up and you need to reconfigure, redeploy. And whereas 5G and cellular technologies tend to have somewhere between, somewhere 15 to 20 year life cycle, Wi-Fi typically has a 4-year refresh cycle, and you're refreshing APs, you're putting in new devices. And when you build in, so if you look at a 20-year life cycle of private 5G, you've effectively got 5 Wi-Fi refreshes, but it's still something like 4 times refreshes of your Wi-Fi equipment compared to one deployment of 5G. And when the new stuff comes onto 5G, of course, it's a software upgrade on the radio side as well, rather than having to redeploy and refresh all of those access points. So very interesting. It's great to hear from someone who's actually deploying this live, to hear from a customer who is in such a big way. And if you're Rob's presentation, all of these presentations are on YouTube, and there's a link to this, which is in the same YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see all the other presentations in there as well. So we call this, in tribute to Cargill's involvement in the food industry, we call this session with Cargill and Brownsville, who come on next with the customers, as breakfast at the diner with the American Diner with Cargill and Brownsville. And Brownsville is our next presenter and participant. We had a fireside chat with Jorge Cardenas, the city of Brownsville, who's the main solution architect for 5G city of Brownsville. And they've done is to deploy citywide private 5G network aimed at public safety. So fire, hospitals, police, all of them use the safety network for talk communication. Drones, World Congress, if you want to find out more about how you can use it for your city and why cities are finding this quite useful, then please do connect with him. We talked earlier also in the UK panel about Milton Keynes and the citywide network there. But that's an adjacent deployment to Bath's citywide deployment as well of private 5G from a different SI. So this whole idea of citywide private 5G networks, I think, and the cognitive city enabling the 5G city is something that really resonates. I remember doing one with NEOM as well with Mansoor Hanif when he was head of innovation at NEOM, where we shipped out a container with a 5G network in it, which they just put on the ground and switch it on, and had a 5G smart city. And when they were building and constructing the site, and before the nationwide networks could move out there. So smart cities, big use case. We then had Salona join us. Salona, many of you will be familiar with, and I didn't realize that Salona actually was named after Barcelona because the company was founded by the founders, an idea that they had in Barcelona. So in some ways, I think for Rajiv and team, MWC is a way of coming home. And Rajiv was sharing with us, as you know, Salona supplies the private 5G network to Cargill and many others as well. But Cargill are rolling out 150 networks a year, and one of the reasons is the ease of deployment, how easy it is for enterprises to connect and deploy and integrate these networks into their operations. But it was interesting, Rajiv giving his take in terms of demand and whether we get towards 500,000 networks, how he's seeing a big driver now through industrial intelligence. And Rajiv has always, I think, right from the time that Salona was founded, his articulation has always been looking at private 5G as the on-ramp for AI. Right? I mean, this is well before 2023. I think there were just a few dreamers such as Rajiv and us who were thinking about AI and how it's going to drive the need for private 5G. But we're beginning to see it now, all the way from AI-enabled surveillance to real-time analytics, automated robots, robotic arms, industrial handhelds, scanners, ruggedized tablets, wearable displays, putting cameras up on production lines so that you can have quality control just using computer vision. I mean, the use cases are just exploding, and all of them need a really reliable communications fabric. And this is something where Salona have been playing to and being focused on. So please meet up with them at MWC if you are interested in learning more. And here is an example also now of their latest LAN, which he shared with us, which he calls Airflex, where I think you've got the user plane deployed actually on the radio itself, so you don't actually need any real infrastructure on site other than just putting the radio up on a wall. So, and we're seeing this with a number of other players as well, moving down in this direction. And we had a drop-in 5-minute presentation also from Martin Green, who presented with us also from his company, Internal Radios as well. So it's great development in architecture in private 5G, which is evolving to allow these to be deployed in small-scale branch offices, etc., where you are restricted for space. So catch up with them at MWC. And now here, something really, really interesting, which has been at the heart of the whole CBRS discussions in the US. Probably less well known if you're not involved in the US. But one of the key drivers in the US for CBRS has been this idea of neutral host. The fact that you can put a radio into a building in the US, and that radio network, which is a private network owned by the building or a system integrator, will not only provide you a private 5G network, but will also interconnect with the networks of the main operators so that you can have cellular connectivity. So this is an architecture that has been adopted by CBRS, where in classical 3GPP architecture, or from the architecture from the large vendors, you'd see something called a mock-in gateway, which is inside the radio. In CBRS, that feature has been made independent. So if you're a building owner, you can actually have your own mock-in gateway. And Infinity and Kishore joined us from Infinity. He is Chief Kishore Raja. He's Chief Cloud and AI Officer. So from Infinity, you can get your own mock-in gateway, so which is a piece of software which sits between the radio and the operators, or your own core network if you want your own private 5G network. And this intermediates between the radio and allows you to connect up to a lot of different operators. So you don't have to rely on DAS. You don't have to go to the mobile operator to get them to commit to come in and putting in a radio in your premises. You can just get a solution from a system integrator or from Infinity, where you can bring in this piece of software deployed in your building, connect up radios to it, and you have operator connectivity as well as your own private 5G network. It's already been deployed at Meta, and I believe the team there actually spun out or came out of Meta before doing this. And some numbers here from Meta in terms of how much they saved with the network. And also, of course, if you don't have four networks from radios from four different operators in your building, you're consuming less power as well. So there is also a sustainability angle to it as well. And this is really important because there are many buildings which aren't large enough for operators to justify their own budgets to go in and put in their own coverage inside the building. And this all of a sudden allows building owners, tenants, system integrators to do that autonomously. So hopefully this is going to be a big driver of network adoption in the US, and I hope that it will transfer into Europe as well, and other parts of the world, to allow wireless connectivity into a world where we're becoming increasingly wireless only. And also, there are workarounds that people have been using up to now in terms of using Wi-Fi calling, etc. But with solutions like that, you don't have emergency calls being able to be made easily, positioning, etc. So the integration with the whole sort of emergency 911 services in the US or 999 in the UK or whatever your local emergency service is more difficult if you're doing it over Wi-Fi. Of course, lack of coverage, drop calls, and lack of visibility and control. These are all things that that customers and tenants complain about with all the LED design that's coming into windows in modern buildings. Getting a signal inside the building is more and more difficult. So Infinity offering a pretty novel solution to it that may be adopted in other parts of the world, but the US is the main market for this today. And we watch with great interest and hope for great success. Here again, showing how it actually works. You've got the Infinity bit of software, which is this Mochen gateway intermediating between the radios and all the different mobile operators in the US. So easy to try. Give Kishore a call if you want to check it out. We then moved into the penultimate session of the day, robotics. Everywhere you go today, you can't avoid a humanoid. Can't avoid a humanoid. And we were looking at humanoids and robotics and vehicles in general as huge sort of drivers of 5G. Pivot 5G. And we had Dustin Lamascus join us from Ericsson. He's global head. It's first time for Ericsson on Uptime. So really glad to have Ericsson here. Catherine Gould joined us from Future Technologies as well. And Catherine, many of you in the community will recognize based out of Barcelona, who at that time the largest private 5G player in Europe, 130 odd networks. So now able to speak from both sides of the Atlantic and what Private 5G is doing there. Fawad from City of Brownsville joined us again. Gianluca joined us again from Aperun, and Rajiv. And everybody was really unanimous in terms of how deploying robots at scale, whether it's in the warehouse or in the factory. We saw all these announcements from Boston Dynamics, etc., about how in the Hyundai factory we're going to have thousands of these humanoids deployed, and similar announcements from Tesla. But if you're going to deploy these to orchestrate them, to control them, you are going to need a very reliable, deterministic network. And private 5G is really the only workable solutions for items like this, which are not just static, they're moving around as well. And of course, the question was, although we as people in the 5G industry know this, has anyone sent the memo to the robots themselves? Because they don't seem to come today with 5G connectivity. And Gianluca was very quick to point out that he's actually working with a customer who's got a unitary robot out of China, and they come with 4G or 5G built in already. So I think we are going in that direction. And I did some research post-event and actually looked up the unitary robots, and that you can actually order them with a 4G module in them. And I'm sure it's only a question of time before you get 5G as well. But hey, 4G is still private LTE, so that's great news. And that's one of my tasks at MWC next week, to go out and look at all the new humanoids and robots out there and whether they have 5G or 4G cellular connectivity built in. So with that, we moved on to the final presentation of the day from Dustin, and he was eager to share with us the position that Ericsson holds. Now, clearly, given the announcements of Nokia in the previous few months, this was a presentation that was well looked forward to, and Dustin didn't disappoint, talking to us about the commitment of Ericsson to the business and the focus on the top of the pyramid, the mission critical, industrial critical, and business critical areas. And interestingly, Dustin also, and you heard this here first, when we talked about more cost-effective or more affordable solutions to go to the bottom of the pyramid, he told us to watch this space and not to be surprised if we hear something from Ericsson later in the year. So you heard that here first, and that's something that we'll be keeping track of. Dustin shared with us some of the use cases that they've been working on, such as in Los Angeles airport, using it for baggage reconciliation and more efficient logistic, full site coverage with 2 private 5G radios. And we see this use case across airports in Charles de Gaulle, for example, in France, and many other airports across the world. The sort of coverage for baggage handling or places across the site, push to talk, security, video cameras, etc. on the air side is huge. And Dustin also mentioned about 2 radios replacing 17 Wi-Fi access points. But a point to bring out is that those 17 Wi-Fi access points don't give full coverage of the poles across the tarmac to stick them out. So the number of Wi-Fi access points are already limited, but those limited access points are replaced quite easily with 2 private 5G radios, which give probably 30 square kilometers of coverage, areas where Wi-Fi simply wasn't there before. And a whole bunch of use cases that Dustin took us through. You can see many horizontal use cases here as well, from connected tools to materials movement, asset scanning, predictive maintenance. And all of these are things that Eric's working quite closely with. So that puts together in one little espresso cup everything that happened in the 10 hours at Uptime. And I hope it's been useful for you. I hope we've given you a useful agenda of issues and talking points that will keep you occupied at MWC Barcelona. And also, with that, I meet Barcelona next week. And thank you for attending this 5th anniversary edition of Uptime. Take care. Safe travels.